Hi, everyone, and welcome to Making the Grade. I'm Michelle Edmonds from Idaho News 6. Changing things up a little bit in December, we're going to be joining you on Wednesdays for the next couple of weeks right here live across all the Idaho News 6 platforms to talk everything education. And so much of our focus, as you well know if you've been joining us, has been about education and the pandemic, and we will be talking about that again today. But there are a lot of other hot education topics, including some major shakeups that could be happening at the State House this week and what that means when it comes to Idaho's education. So joining me to have the discussions, as we always do, is Idaho Education News reporter Kevin Richard. Hello, Kevin. Happy post-Thanksgiving.
Hi, Michelle. Good to see you. Good to see you went the extra mile on those decorations. I mean, yeah,
My Be Merry sign behind me,
yeah,
you like that? Yeah,
but it
I
had to
just
take
figured,
hours to put together and set up, but it's very nice.
we're trying to get into the spirit, right?
Yes.
Even if we have to be socially distant, that's what we're going to do. So, here on Making the Grade, we always love to have your comments, your thoughts as we dive into some of the top education stories happening basically around the state this week. And Kevin, let's start with the COVID-19 numbers because obviously Idaho Education News does such a good job in tracking those numbers for us. And as we have talked about, as was somewhat expected, as schools closed down last week, whether we're talking about the K-12 system or college campuses, we did see a decline in the number of coronavirus cases.
Right. We saw drop-offs during Thanksgiving week, which you would figure on because, K-12 schools were closed either for at least part of the week, or in many cases, like in Boise and West Ada, they were closed for the entire week. So the numbers did drop off considerably. Saw the same things happening on the college campuses. Uh, but what we don't know, and why I would not get my hopes up too high here, is we don't know if this was a blip because of the holiday week or if it's a sign of anything more of a trend. Looking what's happening statewide, looking what's happening with the cases and the hospitalization rates and the death toll, it's hard to be very, very optimistic about where the trends are headed. So what we saw last week, maybe it's a blip. Obviously, I hope it isn't, but it feels like it's probably more likely a blip than anything else.
Kevin, I know that Idaho Education News tracks what school districts are doing, open, closed, hybrid models, and we'd love to hear from you out there in Facebook land what your kids are dealing with now between the Thanksgiving break and the Christmas holiday break.
Right,
But
because
there are
Boise
some
this week is when Boise went back to you know all online learning for all 25,000 students, and that happened right after the Thanksgiving break.
and Nampa as well, correct?
Yes, I believe so. But West Ada is still in its combination of face-to-face learning, some hybrid learning in the higher grades.
So what will be fascinating is to see these numbers dependent on the school districts and if there is some control in the spread because of kids who perhaps like in the Boise School District did not go back into actual classrooms.
Right. We'll track it every week. We'll keep an eye on it and see what the numbers look like next week, following week, and beyond.
And on the campus level, those numbers dropped as well. And many of the campuses sent kids, college students home and asked them to stay home to go into an online model as well after Thanksgiving break.
Right. Big declines on almost every campus. Again, not really a surprise when the campuses closed for Thanksgiving break and in many cases are closed now for the entire semester. Not a surprise that you would see declines in numbers. Probably you'll see low numbers from the campuses because there are going to be some students who are back on campus, even learning in an online setting as opposed to going to classes. So I would imagine these numbers are going to stay low. It was interesting, to see it pretty much across the board, and even at Boise State. We had the very high profile cancellation of the Boise State football game on Saturday, which happened kind of at the last minute Saturday morning. But in spite of that, the overall case numbers for Boise State dropped considerably last week, as we saw on several other campuses.
Kevin, let's discuss what happened at Boise State virtually, I should
Mhm.
mention, yesterday, because this was a really unique opportunity and it was spearheaded by Boise State in particular. President Dr. Marlene Trump held a virtual conference in which she really wanted to get to the heart of students' well-being during the pandemic. I know that you listened in on the conference. Tell us a little bit about what you saw, what you learned.
It was a really interesting conference. It was a 4-hour virtual conference where you had administrators from colleges all across the country, more than 20 administrators, really running the gamut. You had representatives of some of the land grant institutions like University of Tennessee, University of Minnesota, big state institutions. You had a couple of administrators at Boise State, including President Trump herself. You had a representative from a community college in Texas. You had the president of Howard University, historically, which has served a historically Black student population. So you had the gamut of administrators from across the higher education spectrum, all focusing on what should colleges and universities be doing for students who are at risk, students who are facing mental health issues, students who are just feeling kind of paralyzed by the pandemic, paralyzed by the economic crisis, paralyzed by concerns over social justice, over and how all of those factors are affecting student decisions and student behaviors, students' decisions to enroll in college and stay in college. It was a fascinating day of discussions, and I feel like I only scratched the surface with the story that I wrote on Tuesday, and I'm going to have more coverage coming up on Thursday. But I also had a chance to talk to President Trump about this before Thanksgiving. I did a preview piece that we posted on Monday morning. And I think for President Trump, this is a cause. I think she's very concerned about students who are just not starting their lives, not starting their post-high school lives, or are putting it all on hold because of the pandemic, because of the concerns. As she put it when we talked last week, she said she just does not want to see a lost generation of students. And it's personal. Michelle, for President Trump, this is a personal issue. She talked to me pretty candidly about how, with her 18-year-old son, they had conversations early on in the pandemic. And as she described it, her son said, this is tougher on people in my age group than it is on adults. And President Trump said, well, her first reaction was to just kind of scoff at that and just say, well, how can it be tougher on young adults than it is on adults who are dealing with work issues, who are dealing with parenting issues, who are dealing with homeschooling issues, virtual learning issues. And as she did more research, she found out that the mental health challenges facing 18 to 26-year-olds are extremely acute. And the numbers and the numbers of students and the numbers of young adults who are really struggling with the pandemic, who are really struggling with the economic issues, who are really struggling with the social justice issues and the social justice debate that we're having. She feels like this is a pivot point and a time where colleges and universities can't compete. They need to collaborate, and they need to figure out ways to do better for young adults.
I found that fascinating. She's calling this Project Launchpad. And of course, that taken from historic measures that happened with NASA. But she's calling it that at this level because Dr. Trump really believes that student well-being has to come first.
She really does. And one of the things that I thought was interesting as I listened to the panel discussions, all of the administrators who spoke really understand that there are mental health challenges facing young adults and that this is an area where colleges and universities need to step up. Everybody recognizes that, but the challenge is, how do you make that work? How do you get students to avail themselves of the services that are available? And one of the things that I thought was interesting, the president of Amarillo College, and this was a community college in Texas in the Panhandle, he said that what they're seeing is that some students who might have been uncomfortable seeking face-to-face mental health counseling are more comfortable doing this in an online setting. So, he's seeing that at his college, but we had an administrator, we heard from an administrator at Mills College. That's a private women's college in Oakland, California. The administrator there said pretty much the opposite. She said, look, we know our students need help. We know our students need to talk to somebody and get some counseling, but they just don't want to do this online. They just can't, stand the idea of one more Zoom meeting. So, I asked, there was a panel discussion that was open to Q&A with reporters, and I asked the panel, well, how do you think this is going to look? How is mental health counseling and mental health services going to look on the other side of this pandemic? How are you going to reach out to students? And the general answer, and I think it's what you would expect more or less, is it's going to have to be a combination. Some people are going to be more comfortable in an online setting. And when you've been forced to do counseling online because of the pandemic, maybe you've picked up some practices that you can apply post-pandemic. But there are going to be some people who just really want that interpersonal connection, who want to be able to look face to face with somebody who's trying to help them talk through and work through some problems.
Kevin, this is just me speculating here, and anybody who wants to weigh in, we'd love to hear if you have a college student wondering how they're doing, how they're handling everything they're going through. But maybe a bright spot after this pandemic is over is that we will have a better grasp of what 18 to 26-year-olds need when it comes to their mental health, that this won't have been forgotten. This isn't just because of the pandemic. Sure, it's heightened the mental well-being of college students, but there's so much more that goes into those years to be able to protect kids and make sure that they are healthy and finding hope.
I think if any of us left home to go to college at the age of 18 or thereabouts in quote unquote normal times, I can only imagine, as one who did that myself, I can only imagine the challenges facing today's students, having to make that decision, having to make that leap, that launch, to use Boise State's terminology, in this time, in this era, in this point in history. I can't imagine the challenges that are facing students today. And one of the things that we heard more than one of the administrators say it in different ways is maybe when we come out of the other side of this, students will feel more comfortable reaching out for help. That the idea of going and getting help and talking to somebody and getting counseling, it won't feel as stigmatized. So if there's a bright spot, if there's something that comes out of this on the other side where we're in a better place, that may be one of those areas.
I certainly hope so.
Yeah,
Let's discuss another story posted on idahoednews.org. Again, if you want to read in depth on any of these stories, that's the place to go, is to Idaho Education News' website. But there's been a school safety review. And so this goes back to our K through 12 system. There's actually the Office of School Safety, if you didn't know, a state-run agency that is under the task of making sure that our schools are safe. And here we're not necessarily, obviously, talking about the pandemic. This is the school safety office that has been developed, unfortunately, because of tragedies that have happened, not in our state, but in other states, to keep our students safe. And they have issued a report. And roughly, Kevin, the report was pretty positive.
Right. And I think part of what's positive about this is that really for the first time as a state, decision makers and policymakers have a sense of what is going on the ground in terms of security, in terms of safeguards on school campuses across the state. I mean, this is a project that has been in the works for several years. This is an office that's been in place now for several years. And this office was tasked with going to every school in the state and doing a safety review and looking at a lot of different metrics. It's not just security in terms of what do you do with visitors and badging visitors, although obviously in this day and age, that's a big factor. That's a big metric that this office is looking at. They're looking at a whole lot of different safety threats that would be facing schools all across the state. So we finally, as a state, policymakers as a state, finally have something more concrete to look at about what's happening in the big picture. Where are schools measuring up better? Where are schools where are the, soft spots in terms of security and safeguards.
And if you want to read more about exactly what was found, all that information is at idahoednews.org. It's just kind of fascinating, the report that they found and the percentages they put with certain things. Because you're right. I mean, they looked at everything from entrances and exits. We're pulling some of it up here. Are they monitoring students during, major times when they're in cafeterias? And are there badges? And all those things that pre-pandemic we were much more worried about for our schools. And it's nice to see that this is coming out now, because school safety still has to be a top priority, even in the midst of what's going on with coronavirus.
Right. And I'll tell you, Michelle, pre-pandemic, when we could actually do work in schools, when we actually visit with teachers and sit in on classes, I can tell you that anecdotally, the schools' responses to safety issues were all over the place. I mean, you go to some schools and you would be signed in, you would get your little, sticky, visitor badge, and you would be escorted from where you showed up at the front door to where you were headed. And, the administrators, from the principal on down to the office staff, they kept an eye on you, and they knew where you were going to be. They expected you to sign in, sign out. I went to one rural school a few years ago, and it always stuck in my mind. I didn't know exactly where to enter the school, so I just entered through what I thought was a main door, but it was actually a door, I think, by a gymnasium. And Michelle, I was walking down the hallway for a couple of minutes. It was a high school, and kids were kind of looking at me like, well, who's this guy? But nobody stopped me. And I was like, practically hoping to be stopped at this point. It's like, somebody, A, tell me where I need to be because I have an appointment, but B, somebody flag down this strange tall guy walking in the hallway that we've never seen before, so we can figure out, who he is exactly and what's he doing here exactly. I was kind of nervous just because I thought, if somebody can walk in that easily and meander around, you hope that the person who is doing that isn't somebody with bad intentions.
I remember that story. That did not, as a mother, did not sit well with me.
No, and I've never named the school publicly. I'm not going to name the school.
Good,
but,
yeah.
Because I can't imagine that the school where I encountered this was an outlier. I think that, in small communities, rural communities, maybe, there hasn't been as much attention paid to safety and security. And unfortunately, in the day and age we're living in, you have to be thinking about that. That has to be top of mind, whether you're in a small community or in the middle of Boise or Meridian.
So speaking of security, there are many decisions underway at the State House level, and I say security because some of the decisions that need to be made there still is exactly how the legislature is going to look, both in the midst of a pandemic, but also in terms of leadership come January. So you may not realize it, but this very first week of December, there are a lot of decisions to be made and some serious movers and shakers this year, because so many of the leadership have not returned to the State House. They've decided to retire. So first and foremost, Kevin, Speaker of the House, Senate Pro Tem, we're talking top leadership positions at the State House essentially up for grabs this year. And what are you going to be watching?
There's a lot to watch, and it's really going to start this afternoon. House Republicans are meeting later today to sort out those leadership elections. And there are contested leadership elections for all 4 House Republican spots. But the one that's at the top of the list that we're going to watch very closely is the race for Speaker of the House. Scott Bedke seeking to stay in the Speaker's position. Wendy Horman, Republican from Idaho Falls, who has been very active and very out front in terms of education funding, in terms of writing public school budgets. She sits on the budget committee right now. She's challenging Speaker Bedke. So how that race shakes out is going to give us a sense of how other things shake out. It's a domino effect from these leadership elections on down to committee assignments and committee appointments. There's a lot to sort out. all of these leadership posts, whether it's House Speaker or Senate President Pro Tem, the floor leaders for these two chambers, then you've got at least one really prominent committee chair that's going to change. That's the Senate Education Chair, because Dean Mortimer stepped down. He retired. He did not seek re-election. So he's out, and that means that you've got a vacancy in the Senate Education Committee. If things go according to form, if it's kind of a chalk process here of moving folks around, Stephen Thane, the vice chairman of the committee, Republican from Emmett, would be in line to be the chair of the Senate Education Committee. Things don't always go chalk. Things don't always go according to to plan or as we would expect, because who knows where folks are going to want to settle in, and who knows how leadership is going to dispense these top assignments. There's a lot to watch this week.
And the results, again, as we're seeing your story there, not going to become official. We will not know the results of the Senate Pro Tem and the House Speakerships until tomorrow, correct?
Right. Yes, Thursday is when we would expect to see those announcements. And then Thursday is when House and Senate leadership meets with the individual members and goes over their requests for committees, and eventually they announce who winds up on what committee. It's a couple of years ago, it was a very low-tech process. You would have these kind of sheets of paper posted outside the offices, and they would kind of move these slips of paper around to show who was on what committee. I mean, it's like I said, it's a pretty low-tech process. But you find out, and you find out through these assignments, really who is going to, be in some key positions that we're going to watch, whether it's the education committees or the budget writing committee. So, that will give us a sense of kind of how the session might unfold.
There is something that's happening that I want to make sure everybody knows about this afternoon. And Idaho Education News has been on the forefront of this in a partnership with the Idaho Statesman and Idaho News 6. So proud to support all the work that you have been doing with the Latino Listening Project. And this afternoon, Latino students are going to be speaking directly, virtually, with the governor. And I'm so excited to hear how this got put together, Kevin, and what you're expecting out of this part of the listening project.
I'm excited just to listen, and that's all I'm going to be doing this afternoon. Shout out to Sammy Edge, our reporter who's been working on this project, and Nicole Foy, who's been working on this at the Idaho Statesman. They've done a tremendous job this past year collaborating on this project, talking to and writing about Latino students and the challenges that they're facing, and their hopes and their plans for the future. Now we get to hear from some of these students, and they're going to be talking to the governor, and we're going to hear the back and forth, the interchange of ideas between students and the governor. It's a unique opportunity, and I'm looking forward to, like I say, I've had very little to do with this project as to kind of beyond just watching it unfold. So that's kind of what I'll be doing this afternoon is watching the conversation unfold. I'll be taking some notes, and I encourage people to join me and join us and listen. You can catch this on our Facebook page at Idaho Education News, and hope you'll join us.
I'll be excited to hear what the governor has his takeaway from this as well, because I have no doubt that when somebody has a chance to really listen in on what's affecting a certain group of students in our state. He has called himself from the beginning, when Governor Brad Little took office, he wanted to be the education governor. This is one way he does that, is by listening in and really taking in what students have to say themselves. So I love that there's going to be this interplay. Right.
I mean, I think it's really cool that we're going to get to hear this kind of conversation between students and the governor. You don't see that very often, but the stakes are so high. Not just we talk about education in the aggregate in terms of trying to improve the school system for Latino students. This is the largest minority population in the state by far. Makes up about, I want to say, about 18% of the population. What this state does in terms of reaching out to Latino students and helping Latino students find a path to success is instrumental to the future success of the state. So, like I say, I'm really looking forward to the conversation, and I hope y'all will get a chance to join us.
That's happening at 4:30 today, correct?
4:30, yes.
And Kevin, before I let you go on that topic real fast, just in case people, you were talking about how important this minority group is, not just because they are so large, but because they are so large, they then play into other metrics that the entire state wants to move forward. So specifically, let's just touch on why the Latino population is so important to the overall goal of the state to make sure that we have a large percentage of our students moving on to higher education. You can't leave out the largest minority group from pulling everybody else up into that goal.
You certainly can't. And when you look at the numbers, they should be a wake-up call to us all. It's, we talk a lot about the 60% goal. We talk a lot about improving the attainment rate. And when we talk about that, that's the percentage of young adults who have either a college degree of some kind or a certificate. Overall, the numbers improved slightly. We had that story about a week or so ago. We're still far from the 60% goal. We're at 44% right now, as opposed to 42% where we've been frozen for the past several years. So a bit of an increase, still a long way to go. But when you look at those numbers for Latino adults, we have one of the lowest attainment rates in the nation. We have had the lowest attainment rate in the nation for Latino adults. That's a huge red flag. That's a huge concern, because we're not going to get to 60% unless we can get some real improvements and really encourage Latino students to continue their education beyond high school, to get, whether it's a degree, a 4-year degree or a 2-year degree or a professional certificate, some sort of education beyond high school that prepares them for a career, that prepares them for that lets them have a chance to get a good job. So what's happening with the Latino student population, what's happening with Latino students now, is going to affect how the state looks and how the state approaches the future.
Again, 4:30 today. You can see that streaming live on the Facebook page at Idaho Ed News. Looking forward to hearing what the governor has to say to these students, but more importantly, what the students have to say to the top man in charge.
Absolutely.
So Kevin, before I let you go, I don't think you were making fun of my Be Merry sign. No. But we do love to have you do a little show and tell. And since I had a preview, I know that you were in the holiday spirit as well.
It's going to be a strange holiday season, just like last week was a strange Thanksgiving, but it is still the holiday season. And you only get to wear these kind of things, for a short window here between now and Christmas. So we're gonna scroll in on these guys. These are right. So we're dachshund owners at our household. We have 1.5 dachshunds. We have one who's full bred, and we have one that's a cross between a dachshund and a Labrador Retriever, kind of like a large dachshund with kind of a Labrador bark. So, they're kind of our, they're part of the family. And, the idea of, combining Christmas and dachshunds was kind of a no-brainer. So I had to have this tie when I saw it. Don't get to wear it very often. This is the time of year to do it.
And of course, right here on Making the Grade with our show and tell segment, where we always like to end on a Be Merry note, it really works for us.
Yes.
Kevin, thank you for all the work that you and the entire team are doing at Idaho Education News, not only to keep us up to speed, up to date, but also to help keep us safe and keep our students safe. If you want to monitor any of the numbers that are happening with coronavirus, Idaho Ed News definitely one of the places to go, because they are following step by step what's happening on the college campuses and the K-12 numbers on those schools, at those schools as well. And again, if you want to see the Latino Listening Project and hear from Latino students and the governor, that's at 4:30 today on the Idaho Education News Facebook page. So Kevin, a lot going on, but hey, It's the holiday season. There's always a lot happening.
It's the holiday season. It's the political season. It's still school in session, so a lot to get to. It'll slow down a little bit for us during the holiday season. We'll take a little bit of a hiatus here on making the grade, but yeah, there's still a lot we're watching.
We appreciate it very much. Thanks for joining us for Making the Grade, everybody. Have a great week.
Thanks.